Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. In this video, I'll show you how to create engaging online lessons for virtual learning. Media or technology can be used for virtual learning are Zoom and WhatsApp. First of all, you have to prepare the learning materials. Learning materials can be in the form of PPT slides so that they look more interesting. Next, set up a Zoom meeting room as an alternative to offline classes. Then, copy the Zoom meeting room, invite link, and share it with your students so they can join.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. In this meeting, we will discuss about Putri. We are all certainly familiar with Putri, but actually, what is Putri? Next slide, please. So, poetry is arguably the first form of writing. Poetry is a sense of the beautiful. According to James Reed, an English writer known for his poetry, drama, and literature, said that poetry is a rich and alluring expression of language. The next is characteristic of poetry. Next slide, please. So, poetry has several characteristics that distinguish it from other literary works, namely, first, figures of speech. Figures of speech or figurative language are ways of describing or explaining things in a non-literal or non-traditional way. For example, a metaphor describes something by likening it to something else. His touch was a lightning strike. The author doesn't mean that the touch was literally a lightning strike, but rather that it produced feelings of heightened excitement and charged emotion. Other figures of speech may include hyperbole, which is a frequently humorous exaggeration that hints at a large truth. The quote, "I run faster than a cheetah." It is example of hyperbole. The mention of object to symbolize or represent something else, and it is also hyperbole. And then descriptive imagery. Imagery is something concrete, like a sight, smell, of taste. Imagery describes what the poet sees, hears, or otherwise sees, be it a literal image or one that exists in his mind. Visual imagery, which describes what the poet sees, is the most common type of image in poetry. It creates a picture that the reader or listener can see in his mind. And the next, punctual and format. The punctual and format of the poem deal with how it is arranged on the page and how the author intends for you read it. For example, if a poem has frequent line breaks and short stanzas, it forces you to read it in a different rhythm, and if it were arranged in longer stanzas with fewer breaks. To better understand this concept, read poetry aloud instead of in your head. When you read poetry or listen to the poet read his own your work, you see the impact of the format. And the last is sound and tone. Poets use different sounds and tones throughout poetry to change the way it sounds. For example, the poem may use alliteration, which is when multiple consecutive words start with the same letter. For example, he may write, "Pretty pigs playfully prints on the permanent." The poet may choose his letters to give the poem a stop or sharp sounds as well. For example, choosing words that use soft consonant like F, M, and W produce a different sound than words with hard consonant like D, K, T, and Z. Next slide, please. And then there are types of poetry. There are two types of poetry. The first one is fixed form. Fixed form is a poem that may be categorized by the pattern of its lines, meter, rhythm, and or stanza. A style of poetry that has set rules. For example, sonnet, villanelle, and limerick. And the second is pre-form. A pre-form is a poem that has neither regular rhyme nor regular meter. Pre-pairs often use cadences or natural patterns of speech rather than a uniform metrical beat. Next slide, please. Categories of fixed form poetry. Fixed form poetry has several categories, including first, lyric. Lyric poetry, it conveys emotional intensity and relies heavily on musical and rhythmical qualities. The types of lyric poetry are odes and sonnets. And then narrative. Narrative poetry, it is told about societies, cultures, and heroes. Ballads are another type of narrative poem. And then the last is dramatic poetry. It tells a story or describes an event in a dramatic and interesting way. Dramatic poetry are written in verse and is usually meant to be recited. Next slide, please. So, before you make a poetry, you should know the element in poetry. Elements in poetry, some are first, rims. Rims is when the endings of the words sound the same. For example, Dust of Snow by Robert Frost. The way a crow struck down on me. The dust of snow from a hemlock tree. Next slide, please. The second is repetition. Repetition is the repeating of sounds, words, or phrase for emphasis. For example, A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. Next slide, please. And then figurative language. Whenever you describe something by comparing it with something else, you are using figurative language. Figurative language is any language that goes beyond the literal meaning of words in order to convey new effects or press insight into an idea or a subject. The most common figures of speech are simile, metaphor, and alliteration. Figurative language is used in poetry to compare two things that are usually not thought of as being alike. Several types of figurative language include: first is simile, a comparison using like or as. For example, as brave as a lion, as dumb as an owl. And then metaphor, a figure of speech in which one thing is spoken as though it were something else, a direct comparison of two unlike things. For example, clothes are cotton candy means that they are fluffy. And then personification, figurative language in which a non-human subject is given human characteristic. For example, the wind gently called her name. My country bore and rides me. Next slide, please. Next element are alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of the same initial consonant sounds. For example, with sweeps, slow, sweet, sour, a little dim, for Melly Hopkins. stop singing of the sea. Next slide, please. And the last is imaginary. Usually these words or phrases create a picture in the reader's mind. Some imagery appeals to other five senses: sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell, and several examples of imagery: sight, visual, smoke mysteriously puffed out from his ears, and then sounds are auditory. He could hear a faint but distant hum. Next slide, please. Okay, next we will learn about how to make a poetry. First, do writing exercises. A poetry might start as a snippet of a verse, a line or two that seems to come out of nowhere, or an image you cannot get out of your head. Okay, the next material, we will learn about how to make a poetry. So first, do writing exercises. A poetry might start as a snippet of a verse, a line or two that seems to come out of nowhere, or an image you cannot get out of your head. You can find inspiration for your poetry by doing writing exercises and using the word around you. Once you have inspiration, you can then save and mold your thoughts into a poetry. Next slide, please. The second is get inspired by your environment and those close to you. Inspiration for a great poem is all around you. Even if you don't see it just yet, think of every memory, situation, and moment as a possible topic, and you'll start seeing poetry all around you. Next slide, please. And then pick a specific theme or idea. You can start your poetry by focusing on a specific theme or idea that you find fascinating. Picking a specific theme or idea to focus on in the poetry can give it a clear goal or objective. This can make it easier for you to narrow down what image and description you are going to use in your poetry. Next slide, please. And then choose a poetic form. Get your creative juice flowing by picking a prompt for your poetry. There are many different poetic forms that you can use. A prompt refers to sonnet, to rhyming couplet. You may go for a poetic form that you find easy to use, such as a pre-verse, or a prompt that you find more challenging, such as a sonnet. Just one poetic form and stick to that structure so your poetry feels cohesive to your reader. And the last, next slide, please. Read examples of poetry. To get a better sense of what other poets are writing, you may look through examples of poetry. You might read poems written in the same poetic form you are interested in. Our poetry about themes or ideas that you find inspiring. You may also choose poems that are well known and considered classics to get a better sense of the genre. For instance, you want to make a poetry, find any topic from your surrounding or topic that you or people consider lately. For example, climate change. After that, mind map of that theme. What is related to climate change? What causes climate change? Greenhouse gas, global warming, and etc. What are the impact? Melting polar ice, dry sea levels, and narrow it again. You can also browse some examples of climate change poetry from internet as your reference. appearances. So I think that's all about Putri. Thanks you so much for watching. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.